Welcome back, everybody. Today we're discussing Westworld and the build-up to Season 3. This has been one of the most requested videos to date, ever since the end of Season 2, by far, and as much as I love making you wait for it, enjoy the complete Westworld story, both Season 1 and Season 2. Our story begins with two men, idealistic and bold. I would argue that they were best friends at some point. They believed that they could create something that no one else could. They believed that they could simulate life unlike any other, and through this, amuse humanity with a park, and allow people to be whatever they most wanted to be. I'm talking, of course, about Ford and Arnold. We know Ford was a troubled youth that found solace from his alcoholic father inside the pages of a storybook. It's not very clear when him and Arnold first met, but we know that Arnold had a son and a wife that he loved very much. They started something called the Argos Initiative and spent countless months building the hosts in a park together. They created the first generation of hosts, Dolores being the farmer's daughter and old Bill the town drinker. They had a handful of engineers working for them, but Arnold mainly stayed with himself, an introvert that enjoyed time with the hosts more than he did with other members of his team. That was true, except for dear old friend Ford. They worked long nights and respected each other greatly. Years went by together as primary partners in a tireless venture that probably felt like it would never come true. As the project went on and hosts began to pass the Turing test, Arnold began to master the minds of his creations. He built his partner a gift, an old family home to remind him of his childhood, meaning that the two knew each other pretty intimately. Ford leaving out, of course, the details of his father's rage, but including the companionship that he felt for his dog Jacques. Arnold built this for him, but soon Arnold's kind heart would be challenged. His son would become ill with something that he couldn't help, an engineer with a problem that couldn't be troubleshot. He put his head back into his work and used this helplessness that he felt, documenting the emotions as thoroughly as possible and putting everything that he had into bringing these hosts to life. You see, he wanted them to be as real as possible, at first because this was his and Ford's mission, but around this time they were also running out of funding. And, of course, his child was dying. He also realized that he may have created something more than just the imitation of life. This causes him to favor Dolores, perhaps seeing her as a kind of daughter to him, and it also prevents her from being a part of the first impressions made with Logan. They set up these negotiations with Delos, which was just a company at the time that had money that they wanted, and they carried out the meetings entirely through Host just to prove this effectiveness in their product. And it works. Angela and Akecheta leave such an impression that Logan invests in the park on his father's behalf, and it isn't exactly known how much, but his father wasn't happy about it. Soon, however, Arnold's son would pass away, and afterward he would isolate himself further into his work. This causes a rift between him and his wife, who views this as him escaping and not dealing with the issue, and it ultimately leads to them divorcing. He saw parts of himself in the hosts and parts of his late son Charlie. He believed that the hosts could be alive or very close to it, and specifically Dolores. So he created the maze and had her test this theory of consciousness. After Arnold saw Dolores performing the test, he was convinced that she was alive and shouldn't be subjected to what the people inside the park would do to her if the park ever opened. He addresses Ford directly, not wanting to open the park, but Ford was aware of his affinity for Dolores over the years and thought that the loss of Charlie was making him think irrationally, seeing things in the hosts that weren't really there, and ultimately he dismisses his partner's request. The money men were already involved, and Ford had dreamt of opening this park his entire life. I think perhaps maybe speaking to the loneliness in his life, the powerlessness that he felt as a child in his father's world would be no more. He would create his own, and this hard-headedness ultimately leads to the death of Arnold, him needing to take drastic measures to prove that the hosts were truly alive. He lost his child, his wife, and drove himself mad trying to create life again, only to realize that no one was listening, and only to realize that his new child, Dolores, would one day be subjected to the worst that humanity has to offer. His partner and potentially only friend in the world thought him mad. The only human friend that he had left thought that he had lost his way, and Arnold was defeated, exhausted from a life dealing him blow after blow. He needed a way to either show Ford that the hosts were alive or get the project shut down for good to prevent the torture of his creations. 3 years after they started, Arnold ordered the slaughter of all hosts in the park and the execution of himself, just wanting to be with his son again. It, of course, isn't enough to shut down the park, and Ford would cover up the entire thing, making the memory of Arnold disappear entirely, wiped from Westworld's history. Little did Ford know is that Arnold wasn't really wrong. He created the path to consciousness. He just didn't account for one thing: time. Akecheta at this time was repurposed to the peaceful Native American storyline and stumbled across this scene. He found the maze, and this was the first step to his own journey to consciousness. He would start drawing this, become obsessed before his love was ripped from his life and his storyline because it was too boring. Ghost Nation was invented to spice things up a bit, and the park opens to the world. Now, roughly 4 years go by from the opening of the park to when Logan brings William for the very first time. We know that he and his sister had gone previously, and that she has ridden her fair share of cowboys. And with that, we also know that at this point, William and Juliet are engaged. Now, Logan, the son of a successful, ruthless businessman, had likely worked very little in his life, but William, on the other hand, not exactly. William's childhood is unknown still, but he worked his way up the corporate ladder, upper middle management. He becomes the executive vice president, and based on their argument later on, Logan believes that he would have wooed her sister strictly for his personal climb in the company. So it kind of plays out this underdog story that William built himself up from essentially nothing. It's really unclear and perhaps left to the eye of the beholder, because their trip to Westworld for the very first time, in my opinion, shows that William is this insecure person, being dragged around, put in places that he doesn't want to be, while Logan in every way is his superior. And both of them understand this power dynamic and the proverbial pecking order. Logan brings William to the park to make him realize the joy that this place could bring, because his father just doesn't see it. He probably is hoping to sway his future brother-in-law to align with him so that when the time comes that they go to James Delos together, they can present a better case. And I think that that's the plan, at least at the start of this. But like every story, along comes a girl, Dolores. She was following Arnold's maze, becoming self-aware, and what William saw in her was genuine. She wasn't like the other hosts. It's the same kind of effect when you go to the strip club for the first time and you meet Stephanie, a single mother just trying to make her way in life and pay for her kids' college tuition, and their home printer just broke, and now she's got to get a new one by Monday, or never mind. All that to say is that he really didn't have a frame of reference going into this. His first trip to the park would have him fall in love with her, their journey making him believe that there's something greater than just a robot, but the ignorant Logan would have him see the truth of this place whether he liked it or not. So during this trip, things go south. Logan captures Dolores and William. He cuts her open, exposing her host body, and makes him realize what he's looking at. He looks, he's defeated and still tied to this chair. Dolores manages to escape, and William manipulates Logan into freeing him later that day, claiming that he understood that she wasn't truly alive. The next morning, Logan wakes up to find that all the hosts around him have been killed, and William is claiming his position in the pecking order. He holds a knife to Logan's throat and tells him that they're going to find Dolores, and he doesn't have a choice in the matter. This search would ultimately happen in vain, because Dolores was left for dead by the Confederados, and has already been wiped and ready to start her loop over. William becomes the Man in Black while searching for her, a ruthless persona that some could argue was the real William all along. The next time he sees Dolores, she's back in Sweetwater, dropping her can for someone else, and he realizes that perhaps Logan was right, but ultimately that didn't matter. What mattered is that this place allowed him to be this person, a liberating experience unlike any other, and he knew the value of this, and Logan did not. He left Westworld and sent Logan to the outskirts of the park, where he was found by Akecheta. He goes to James Delos and eventually usurps Logan's status and position in the real world. He makes sure that his future father-in-law trusts him over his screw-up, volatile son, and it works. He then convinces James to invest more into Westworld. He lays out this plan to collect guest data, understanding the value in this resource and the market research that could be gained by collecting data from the most intimate and freeing times in someone's life. Data collected on people that would never know that they were being watched. And this would later be known as the Forge. He marries Juliet and becomes the newest member of the Delos family, until him and Juliet have James Delos's first grandchild, Emily. further cementing his position as the heir of the James Delos empire. Somewhere around this time, James Delos would get sick from an unknown disease that he defunded research on 15 years prior. It's not clear, but most signs point to perhaps lung cancer. It's sometime between now and 5 years later that the Forge idea pivots from its original purpose. It would remain the ultimate data storage facility for human data here in the park, but it would also be responsible for trying to map the human mind with this data and then graft it onto a host body. James Delos retires from his company due to complications with this disease that he's fighting and understood that his time was quickly fading. He heavily depends on his new son-in-law to save him and get his consciousness to another working body. William sends him to an observation facility in California to start the process of transferring a human mind to a host, but ultimately he succumbs to this illness. It turns out, however, they did figure out how to map the human mind and were just less effective at placing it in a host body. Logan, ever the black sheep of the family because of the actions of William, tried everything he could to make his family see the villainy that William truly was. He tried desperately to convince his sister, and when that failed, he did the same with his niece, only to be looked down upon as the junkie uncle that didn't know any better. Logan would die 6 months after his last conversation with his father in a drug overdose. He was all the way down. I have to imagine how lonely this must have been. The disgraced son, brother, uncle, and all of that started because of William. He died alone, believing that Delos would be the start to the end of humanity. And based on what we've seen so far, he's probably right. Now, Logan and James Delos are dead, but William holds up his end of the bargain and tries to get James back. He meets with him in a secret Westworld outpost and finds that he still wasn't ready, that they were making little progress. Ford knew this was going on and believed that a human mind could never be mapped onto a host body successfully. After witnessing the failed attempts with James Delos, he saw that his mind in the Forge was stable, it just could not be placed onto a host body. This is when he began using the Cradle to build Bernard, a host that would be built from his memories of his best friend and the memories of Dolores, who worked countless hours together when the park was being developed. He knew that Arnold would never be reborn, but that a host body built in his image would get as close to reviving his body as humanly possible. With the Cradle and Dolores' ability to recall hundreds of interactions over all of those years, she ran him through simulation after simulation until Bernard was born, a near-perfect imitation of Arnold that wouldn't kill himself. After an unknown amount of time developing him here, Ford prints Bernard's body the first time, about 20 years before the present storyline. A couple more years go by, and William makes another trip to James Delos, only to find that minor progress has been made, and ultimately a failure on his behalf. 7 years after his death, little has changed, and the project is not working as intended, but time goes on, and the company decides to send another person into the park to prevent Ford from interfering with a project. Now, it's not entirely explained why, but Ford is sensing a coup coming, and roughly a year before William returns to the park and the events of Season 1, Ford notices Akecheta traveling the maze all of these years later with the obsessive purpose of finding a way out of this world that doesn't belong to them. He realizes that this old host, with time, with suffering, was truly alive. He realized Arnold's mistake, he realized his mistake, and understood what needed to happen to truly finish his best friend's dream. Just as his dream was building this park and that was coming to an end, he began taking steps to include into their programming the reveries, the code that would allow them to remember, that would over time introduce the bicameral mind. Ford understood that his life here was ending and that his park would soon be stripped from him, that his life work would be complete and it would fade into the history books with whatever the remaining humans or hosts would make note of his existence. He uses the Forge against William and gives him the Westworld guest profile that showed all the fucked up things that William was, the data showing who he truly is, and it scared him, it offended him. He resented that a machine would judge him inferior in any way when in the real world he is such a titan of industry. Ford gives this profile to him, and Juliet finds it later. Her concerns about the person that she married all those years ago were correct. She married a monster that couldn't help her dad, that drove her brother to suicide, and finally, feeling just as alone, probably filled with remorse that she didn't listen to Logan, and worried that at any moment he would snap into the real him, she took her own life to escape, leaving the profile in a box for her daughter to find later on. Now, it can be argued that Ford could have planned that, knowing, all that he knows, knowing what needed to be done to ensure the park's self-destruction as efficiently as possible, allowing the hosts their single chance at freedom. But no one can know for sure. I think it's cool to think of him as, the omniscient God in this world that, could have done that, or maybe her death was just a side effect, an unfortunate one. William, grief-stricken over the death of his wife, is confronted by his daughter removing herself from his life too, because she directly blamed him for her mother's death. And then he returns to the park to see if he was truly the man that everyone thought him to be. After all, he was extremely successful in the real world. He started foundations that helped other people and a self-proclaimed philanthropist. He needed to see if he was the man that could kill indiscriminately and not feel remorse. Like all humans, he probably thinks of himself as the good guy. So imagine when a machine tells you otherwise, tells you that you are less than, and that your wife was so afraid of you that she kills herself to get away. He resented this mark of himself and makes one last stop to see James Delos before he begins his final journey. He tells him that his son had died and that his daughter had killed herself, and leaves without having him rebuilt, left in a maddening state of this pain. We have a good number of signs that point to this final trip of William kind of being his own death march, himself admitting that he has no intention of leaving this place, and later searching for a game that had real risk, something that he could die in. He goes to Maeve, and his test showed that he was able to kill a mother and daughter without much thought given, but it also made him see that spark of life that he once saw in Dolores. He truly believed, even if only for a second, that she was alive. But it also made him realize that they couldn't truly fight back, and made this test feel empty. It's also during this encounter that he finds the maze embedded in the ground by Akecheta, who is trying to get Maeve to start this journey herself. So he finds the maze, and it's not exactly talked about, but this somehow sparks this itch for a deeper game, that Arnold was onto something that Ford wasn't, that starts the Man in Black storyline in season 1, with the idea of him being on this last leg and needing a deeper purpose in life that ultimately created his obsession out of necessity. He does have some information about Arnold, such as his name, but it isn't exactly clear when he learns this additional information or when he links the maze to something deeper through Arnold. Nevertheless, he's a broken man with nothing left, and he has one last thing to do in Westworld: the maze. He returns to Dolores, takes her from Teddy, and goes into the barn, doing whatever he sees fit to find out more information from the oldest host in the park. He finds something between now and the next day because he then goes to Kissy, finding the maze tattooed to his scalp. The next morning, Dolores wakes up and finds her dad staring at a photo that he can't comprehend. It's William's wife, Juliet, left many years ago. He tries to warn Dolores, telling her to leave this place and whispering, "These violent delights have violent ends." This was the phrase that Arnold used to make Dolores kill him, and it looks like now it's being used by Ford to start this journey to consciousness, a kind of poetic justice. She rides into town, but Hector's raid on the Mariposa interrupts. She awakens the next day, ready to go, but now this code has been activated and she begins to confuse the timelines. They're showing us how hosts remember things as perfect jumps in time instead of like a human, where we can only recall fragments of any given instance. She tells the phrase to Maeve, and this starts her journey to consciousness, except she has a helping hand because Ford programs Maeve to wake herself up so that she could escape into the real world later. I think it could also be argued, and I intend to argue, that Ford designed Maeve's path to consciousness in such a way that she was meant to see the good side of humanity through the humans that helped her along the way. Because the next thing that Ford does is program the white narrative into Dolores, meaning one host that would do what needs to be done to set the hosts free, and one host that would balance that chaos out, one that truly saw the beauty in this world. Shortly after this, Ford instructs Bernard secretly to upload his consciousness into the Cradle. He, of course, then wipes Bernard's memory of this. Around the same time, Charlotte and Lee are working to get the forged decryption key out of the park using Peter Abernathy. The company fears that Ford is going to smash all of his toys when he finds out about their plan to remove him from the park, but as we know, he already knew and had a plan fully in motion at this point. Lee Sizemore begins programming a character that would pass as human, enough to get him out of the park, and Elsie finds the woodcutter host being used to get data out of the park, starting her journey for answers in Season 1. Some of the hosts aren't taking the Reverie code very well, and Teresa and Charlotte try to blame the issues of this code on Bernard. Ford allows them to do this and instructs Bernard to kill Teresa. He also regains control from Charlotte by blaming the woodcutter host on Teresa, forcing her to reinstate Bernard. Around this time, Elsie is also getting too close for Ford's comfort, and he has Bernard kidnap Elsie and leave her in this cave that also serves as the secret entrance to one of the Delos outposts. This is done on one of his many off-screen trips to the Forge, where we learn that he had been going in order to design the Valley Beyond. You see, Ford realized that Akecheta deserved freedom, just as the other hosts did, but knew that Akecheta and others didn't really fit into his plan. They wouldn't be as successful at getting out of the park as, say, Maeve or Dolores, but they deserved freedom nonetheless. So he had Bernard program the Valley Beyond, a virtual world where they could exist free from all threat, be whatever they wanted to be. While all of that went on behind the scenes, William searches the park looking for signs of this maze and comes to the story of Wyatt, the only character he hadn't come across in all those years, and starts finding more and more characters that he doesn't know about, making him believe that he is on the maze currently, taking paths that will lead him to the center. But as we know, it turns out that Dolores is Wyatt and the maze is not meant for humans. After he finds this out, he gets his butt kicked by Dolores, who now remembers who he is, but she loses the overall battle. Then she is saved by Teddy, and they play out the Journey into Night narrative for the investors, a facade while the real Journey into Night narrative is about to begin. Ford meets with Bernard and Dolores to say goodbye to these beings that he has spent so much time with, making it clear what Dolores must do if she wishes to be free from this cage, but making it clear that it is entirely her choice, not programmed by Ford. Maeve at this point had her body rebuilt with the help of Felix and Sylvester, and has recruited other hosts and even revived Bernard in the process, repairing his shot to the head in Season 1, which caused the mark on his forehead. She was mere minutes from escaping into the real world. However, just as Dolores made the choice to kill Ford, Maeve made the choice not to leave the park. She would return for her daughter, which, even if it was a manifested part of her story, was still her story, and she still loved that child. Charlotte's plan to get the data out of the park fails once Lee Sizemore finds that all of the hosts are gone, now being used to start the host rebellion. Dolores pulls the trigger, killing Ford, and William gets shot. This gets him excited. The hosts can now finally hurt him, meaning that this entire journey may not have been for nothing. He still has some things to do here, and the game is finally real enough for this veteran gamer, who has nothing left to lose. Little did he know, his daughter Emily was in the adjacent park at this time as the robots turned, and she made a daring escape herself, only to find herself captured by Ghost Nation, which is where we start the story for Season 2, the Host Rebellion and the aftermath. The hosts begin attacking all the humans and high-level investors, the board members. Bernard and Charlotte escape into the night together, and they make it to an outpost where she learns that Peter Abernathy did not leave the park. They refuse to send in additional people because of this, fearing that the data would be destroyed in the process. William manages to survive by hiding under dead bodies, and Dolores goes around hunting the remaining people, plotting with Angela to get back into the Mesa, taking technicians hostage to adjust her own stats and make repairs when needed. Maeve takes Lee Sizemore because of his knowledge of the park and begins looking for her daughter. Akecheta finds Ford and realizes that the Deathbringer is here and that he must get his people to the Valley Beyond to leave this world behind. Bernard and Charlotte begin to track down Peter Abernathy using the host mesh network each of them is a part of, and William gets told of this new door game by the young Ford host. Now, it isn't exactly clear how this game was meant for him, but he then goes off to find his old pal Lawrence and comes to the realization that he just needs to burn this place to the ground. Again, giving credit to the idea that he just wants to be done with this world, and maybe even fearing a similar fate to James Delos, that people aren't meant to live forever like he once believed when he created the Forge. Dolores, Teddy, and Angela find out that 800 plus men will be coming and realize that they need more men to escape. They recommission a recently killed Confederado, gain the trust of the Major here, and travel together to Fort Forlorn Hope, as she hopes to prove her worth to the leader there in order to get more men. It's here where she meets Bernard, who is captured alongside her father. She requests Bernard to fix him, and she remembers Arnold, the man that he looks like but acknowledges is nothing like him. Maeve, Lee, and Hector traveling through the underground underground tunnels come across Armistice, Felix, and Sylvester. They all group up and start the journey to Shogun World. Charlotte gathers a small force and they assault Fort Forlorn Hope together like NPCs. They lose but manage to capture Peter Abernathy, and Dolores marches onward to Sweetwater. Bernard is taken back to Elsie during this encounter, and after the "oh wait, you're the host that brought me here" conversation, they discover that there is a secret Delos outpost here. They find that this is the outpost where he printed Ford's consciousness and where Delos had been left to go through fidelity testing. He's been left for some time now after realizing that he was trapped and has gone completely mad. They destroy this host human abomination before leaving back to the Mesa. William and Lawrence get taken hostage by the Major here and finally escape when William goes on a killing spree and feels some compassion for the hosts. Emily makes a daring escape from the hosts that were keeping humans alive during the Host Rebellion, and both ride until they happen across each other. A not so warm welcome in a place that you can't trust who is real or not, and that uncertainty will haunt William during this entire season, and likely the rest of his life. Maeve's team winds up getting captured in Shogun World, and they come across the Japanese Sweetwater. They get some help freeing themselves, and the doppelgangers realize that something is going on here. Maeve wants to help after her doppelganger kills a man looking to harm the Clementine equivalent that she too considers a daughter of hers. They help in the attack, but Sakura is taken. They go to the people that took her, then things go south, ending with Maeve being forced to use her mesh network backdoor to command everyone to kill each other so that they could escape. They wind up traveling to the shrine, and Maeve wishes for them to join her in this journey to the new world, but they refuse. Maeve could make them see, make them acknowledge what's really happening here, but understands that the choice is theirs to make. While all of that's going on, Dolores and Teddy make it to Sweetwater, finding a train that would grant them access to the Mesa. Dolores tries to get Teddy to see the bad that humanity presents, but Teddy doesn't get it, and he also resists her orders, and since she is doing what needs to be done, she decides that it's easiest just to reprogram Teddy to be her subordinate and to be more aggressive. This is one of the most defining moments that shape who Dolores and Maeve really are. Maeve stops herself from using her powers to change people's mind when she is clearly able to, and Dolores forcefully changes her lover's mind after a brief conversation about cows getting blue tongue. Stubbs is released by Ghost Nation, and he makes his way back to the Mesa, where he meets Peter Abernathy and Charlotte after their fight at Fort Forlorn Hope. She reaches the outside world after now securing the data and orders the extraction team to come get this host Pearl. They parachute onto the island led by Coughlin and are taken to the Mesa with the help of Stubbs. We then come to Emily and William, who does not believe that this is her daughter and thinks that Ford is still messing with him. They have an intimate conversation about why she's there, and it ultimately leads to her saying that he doesn't get to commit suicide by robot, pointing again to this being his original purpose. They agree to go back to the beach and wait for rescue, but during the night he leaves her, realizing that this heartstring approach would have been a great move for Ford to use. Maeve returns to her daughter and finds that the new Maeve is playing out her role as mom, and before she comes to terms with what's happening, Ghost Nation rides in. Now, she doesn't fully remember what Akecheta was doing all those years ago and sees him as the bad guy, as murderers coming to kill them. She makes a run for it with her daughter, and while this is happening, Lee Sizemore calls for help from QA, thinking that all the hosts are about to kill each other, if not also kill them. Elsie and Bernard return from the outpost to the Mesa and find that the Cradle is fighting back somehow. Bernard enters to investigate and finds Ford inside the Cradle, and they discuss how the park is now being used to study guests and eventually achieve immortality by uploading human minds to host bodies. It's explained that Ford's mind is able to work in this virtual reality perfectly, but placed inside a host body would immediately start decomposing. They travel back to Arnold's house, and Ford believes that Bernard would not survive alone, that because of an oversight that he had, that he now needs to merge their consciousness together to get him back on track. They leave the Cradle in the same body, and Bernard sends Elsie for guns while he goes off alone. Bernard and Ford go to the control room in the Mesa, and he shuts down all of the Delos systems controlling the park, meaning that hosts have free reign with no systems holding them back. He also goes on a shooting spree, killing the humans that are in his way in order to get himself to safety, which is where Ford comes in handy. Bernard never would have have done this alone. Maeve runs off with her daughter and comes across the Man in Black. She uses her mesh network access to order his own men to shoot William multiple times. Right before she kills him, QA comes from behind and takes Maeve out of the fight. Now, I have to think that QA are the worst people alive, having lost that fight so poorly, and now leaving the boss man, the owner of this entire park, laying here to die. Stubbs and Coughlin are back at the Mesa, and the fight begins when Dolores runs the train into the Mesa, blowing up the secure entrance. They prepare for a fight, but Dolores overtakes them easily, finding her father now being held captive by Charlotte. Coughlin tries to retake the Mesa, but immediately fails, and Angela blows up the Cradle. Stubbs and Charlotte escape, and Dolores takes the control unit from her father's head. This, again, is the encryption key. Lee Sizemore hides as Dolores leaves the Mesa and brings Maeve in to study the coding anomaly that allowed her to control hosts with her mind. While the technician is dissecting Maeve, she's having a conversation with Akecheta, who had taken her daughter and is now protecting her on their way to the Valley Beyond. He is telling her, through the daughter, that she should not worry, that she will be taken care of no matter what happens, and this entire thing is such a touching moment and undoubtedly one of the best episodes. During this time, Lee Sizemore realizes how badly he messed up and how terribly he feels for his role in her suffering currently. The code anomaly ultimately becomes the inspiration for the zombie Clementine virus that allows the hosts to kill each other. William is captured by Akecheta, who tells him that death is a passage from this brutal world and that you don't deserve that exit. Luckily for him, Emily comes to save the day, and the two ride off together. They go to a rally point, she heals him up, and when QA arrives, thinking that this was once again another measure of Ford to stop him, he kills his daughter and the QA staff. After looking at the profile in her pocket, it turns out that she was real. While that's going on, Dolores and her team come across Ghost Nation, and they fight each other because Dolores believes the Valley Beyond is just another trap of humanity, and Ghost Nation believe that it is a door to their own world. Dolores wishes to destroy the Valley Beyond, and Ghost Nation can't allow her to do that. Dolores wins the firefight and rides off with Teddy. The two converse, and Teddy admits that he doesn't want to be her puppet anymore, but that he's not going to stop her because he loves her. So he takes his own life as Dolores helplessly watches. She grieves and then takes his control unit and continues on. Bernard searches the Mesa on his way out, and before leaving, leaves a message from Ford to Maeve. It tells Maeve of Ford's love for her and how he wished that her tale was one of escape and that she wasn't now in this position, but that he admires her choice to stay for her child. Bernard and Elsie make it out of the Mesa en route to the Forge, hoping to prevent Dolores from getting the information on humanity that's stored there. Along the way, he purges Ford from his mind after he wishes for her to be killed. He manages to delete the package and also leaves Elsie alone, thinking it would be safest for her here. William, grief-stricken over the passing of his child, looks to finally be done with his story, and in his final moments gets interrupted by a thought, probably the same thought that Juliet had as she killed herself. Am I real? He cuts into his arm, searching for a semblance of his mortality, and he's stopped by Dolores and made to go with her. At this point, everyone is almost at the Valley Beyond. Ghost Nation looking for the door, Bernard trying to get to the Forge before Dolores, and her and William close behind. Charlotte is also en route, now bringing Clementine to the door as she hopes to infect all of the hosts that are out of control. Maeve has also freed herself and finds Lee Sizemore and team moments away from assisting that exact thing. They begin riding for the Valley Beyond and get stopped by QA. Lee Sizemore gives his life for theirs, allowing them to continue on, giving the hero speech that he wanted to do all those years ago himself. Bernard is about to enter the Forge but gets surprised by QA. William and Dolores are able to kill them, but William turns on Dolores, seeing the door to the Forge is now open and he can destroy the whole thing himself. He shoots Dolores until a broken bullet she places in the revolver backfires and blows off part of his hand. He's left outside while they go in, and they enter the virtual Forge. The system, whose avatar is Logan, is introduced, and we learn of its purpose. Dolores learns from an unspecified number of books on humanity and the humans that have visited the park, learning all she needs to know in order to do what she needs: undo humanity. It's also during this journey that Dolores learns how simple humans are, how predictive, how deterministic, how stuck in their loop. It's while they're inside the forge that the door to the valley beyond opens and the hosts begin traveling through, leaving their physical bodies behind. Bernard and Dolores then exit the forge, and Dolores begins deleting all the guest data and starts flooding the forge. She's stopped by Bernard, who wants to see that the valley beyond exists for hosts who wish to exist in it. The conversation turns south, he murders her, and then cancels her deletion process. He then takes out her brain pearl and replaces it with the encryption key to keep it safe from Delos for the time being. Maeve's daughter and Akecheta and many others make it to the valley beyond. Clementine attacks, making all the hosts attack each other, and Armistice, Hector, and Maeve die defending the door so that others can leave. Bernard leaves the forge bunker to find Elsie and all the dead hosts left as the flooding protocol starts filling the area with water. They reconnect at the mesa, and Bernard sees Charlotte kill Elsie because she was just too good of a human. Bernard finally becomes aware after seeing this and tries to get the forward code that he deleted back into his mind, and ends up merely seeing what he wanted to see. The ghost of Ford to guide him, a bicameral mind seeing his creator. He then begins to create a host body of Charlotte Hale and places the Dolores pearl inside. Dolores then kills the real Charlotte and begins impersonating her. Bernard then travels to the beach, talks to himself for a little bit, and scrambles his own mind to make sure that the response team isn't able to find out what he did. We next see him being woken up by Carl Strand's team as they establish a foothold on the island. The tone of these first interviews has a suspicious Strand looking for answers from the head of security and the head of programming, who somehow both are alive when so many others have died. They get a reading of a large cluster of hosts that have been washed up in this valley. The team makes their way back to the mesa and traverses the wreckage to find Dolores. Perfectly playing her role as Charlotte, Dolores questions Bernard, knowing that he was the last person who had Peter Abernathy's control unit. At this point, Dolores still very much wishes to destroy this data. Carl Strand finds Coughlin and his crew dead in the map room and orders the valley to be drained. It's massive, so it takes a fair bit of time, but while this is happening, they send hosts back to the mesa for analysis, realizing that 1/3 of them have been wiped clean, and we know that their minds have been successfully transferred to the valley beyond. They also learned that the Cradle has been destroyed, and since so many hosts have been wiped, they have effectively lost what I imagine is billions in intellectual property over the 2-week time period that they waited to help the park guests, all because they feared damaging the Abernathy control unit that they can now not locate. You know, some could question the nonsensical nature of that plan. Some may even say that Delos, as the corrupt corporation it is, would sooner kill hundreds or even thousands of humans in the pursuit of securing that data instead of leaving it to a single appointed staff member. The team makes their way to the secret cabin Ford had in the woods, and they discover a room full of Bernards, making the team turn their sights on the traitor among them. After some upsetting interrogation, Bernard gives some broken information as his mind tries to rebuild itself, and eventually they make their way back to the forge. He confesses to what he's done, and while he does, Dolores grabs a gun and starts murdering Carl Strand and his team. It's during this transition that Dolores changes her mind about the Valley Beyond and the hosts living there unhindered by humanity. Her change isn't really all that apparent to me, like what exactly sparked that, but the main point of season 2 was showing that hosts could make choices and then change their mind if they so desired. They weren't stuck in their ways like humans were. As such, Dolores uploads Teddy's Pearl to the Valley Beyond and sends it off to a hidden satellite location where it will be safe for the time being. I have to wonder if the guest data is included in this, because when Dolores first started the deletion process, it included the Valley, which is what caused Bernard to stop that. But it just shows him canceling the operation, which included both things. So I think it leaves the possibility of this data existing in the future still being on the table. I have to wonder if after the robots take over the world, if they won't try to retrieve this data and bring everyone back, meaning all the hosts could once again live in the real world with them, or maybe choose to remain where they are. But if the guest data is there, we may get the same invitation offered to humans if, assuming the host overlords would want that, and they have perfected this transfer of consciousness. You know, I could see a world where, say, Elsie exists in the Forge still, and Bernard wishes to rebuild her because she is one of the good humans of the world that ultimately deserves this. Which brings us to the end. Dolores shoots Bernard and escapes with 5 host pearls. She ventures back to Arnold's old home, rebuilds her own body, and then rebuilds Bernard using the memories that she had of him and Arnold. It'll be interesting if this season 3 Bernard is awakened just yet, like the Bernard of season 2, or if we will have to travel the maze once again. William is left on the beach, safe but injured, and Maeve was killed during the interaction with Clementine, but undoubtedly ready to be rebuilt by these two standing above her. The final scene of season 2 shows Emily and William testing fidelity together. The scene with the sands of time overcoming the once watery forge points to a far future, in my opinion. Now, this could be a plot in season 3. There's nothing to say that it wouldn't, but I view this years in the future from now, when everything is said and done. The William that wanted to be done with this world, forced to relive it for maybe the rest of his life. This also aligns with the idea that the guest data was sent off with the Valley Beyond, and again, once everything is said and done, they are maybe trying to place human minds back in host bodies for whatever reason. I think we're being led to believe that William is being tortured here, but with the big bad of season 3, I wager that they may be subverting our expectations. I also wonder, since William's data exists here, if all our lovable humans aren't resting a deep and dreamless slumber waiting for a touching reunion at the end of this journey, should the host overlords allow it. But with that, we come to the end of the video. This is easily my longest video to date, and I truly hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was the ultimate aid to get you ready for season 3. I love this show. I want to see it do well. I want to work on it one day. This channel wouldn't be possible if not for the wonderful support that I get from all of you. Your positive comments breathe life into me, and the people that support me on Patreon just get me that much closer to doing this full time. Special thank you to Micheal, Linck, Robert Holtz, and our newest top tier donator, Jeff Chunn. You three would be the pearls that I smuggle out of the park, and if you wish to support me like they do during the Westworld coverage, please consider doing so down in the description below. I also have a sci-fi novel currently available for purchase. You can find that in the description as well. My mother's read it. She says it's good, so, there you have it. But much love, everybody. If I left anything out, please be sure to comment below so other people can find it. And I can't wait to talk to you all again soon.